Good afternoon, everyone. Arthur, I thought when we had that planning meeting, you said if I bought you a beer, I could have 12 minutes.
I'm still waiting for the beer, Bevan.
I promise you, I promise you. Also in our planning meeting, Arthur said at the time, I might ask the speakers to say one sentence at the start of their talk which gives you an idea what it's really all about. Well, I can do that, but I'll do it in a poem. Our land abounds in nature's gifts, in beauty rich and rare. But the United States has its grip on it and our government doesn't care. That we Australians are under the military and economic and cultural domination of the United States is a fact of life and to our great disadvantage. But whilst much has been written and talked about AUKUS and the Forced Posture Agreement, much less about US economic domination. Oh, skipped a slide there. Okay. It's all right. But economic domination helps to explain why a wealthy country has so many poor and homeless and workers struggling to keep their heads above financial waters, and 1 in 6 Australian children living in poverty. Now, I must acknowledge that the material I'm giving you today, much of it came from Professor Clinton Fernandes, and I recommend his book, Island Off the Coast of Asia, as well worth reading. So I do thank Clinton for this. We owe him something. But concern about the depth of foreign ownership and control of Australian industry and resources was arising back in the 1970s. Len Fox, in his book, Multinationals Take Over Australia, which was written in about 1980s, provided the following information, which you can see up there on the PowerPoint, of the current ownership, foreign ownership of Australian industry in the late 70s, 1970s. It was getting a great concern, and it was the Australian Bureau of Statistics provided that information. Now, the Fraser government at that time decided to encourage more foreign investment in Australian industry and resources. And so little Johnny Howard, his treasurer, whom my brother-in-law calls the cockroach, stopped the Australian Bureau of Statistics from collecting any further data on foreign ownership of Australian industry or resources. And it's never been restored ever since. So there's a gap in our knowledge of that situation. We're indebted to Clinton Fernandes, therefore, for doing the research much more recently about the situation. He says, and I quote as follows, "Right now, US corporations eclipse everyone else in their ability to influence our politics through their investments in Australian stocks. Using company ownership data from Bloomberg, I analysed the ownership of Australia's 20 biggest companies a few days before the 2019 federal election in May. Of those 20, that's the biggest, 15 were majority owned by the United States investors, and 3 more were at least 25% owned. And that list included the following. It doesn't work.
Is Emma around?
Have you been using the arrow?
I'll use the arrow. Oh, okay.
Emma?
Oh, well, anyway.
What's a conference without at least one
We'll come back to it. Okay, I'll read it out. He said the following figures. The Commonwealth Bank of Australia, once the People's Bank, but following privatisation, is now 62% US owned. No longer the People's Bank, it's an American bank. Westpac Bank is 64% US owned. The National Bank of Australia is 63% US owned, and the ANZ Bank 54% US owned. The four big banks, all owned by US investors. Woolworths is 66% US owned, Rio Tinto 65%, Wesfarmers 56%, and so the list goes on. The Australia Institute has also produced similar figures, but even higher level of US ownership than that. Clinton says the Australian Stock Exchange's top 20 companies make up close to half of the market capitalisation of the stock exchange. One might well ask, how does US economic domination affect the Australian people, us? After all, the government keeps telling us that foreign investment is a great boon and we need it. Well, because of their financial size and domination, decisions about Australian investment and development are made not by the Australian government, but in the boardrooms of those corporations, and most probably overseas. The decisions are made to maximise the profit for their shareholders. That's their prime responsibility, not in order to meet the needs or priorities of the Australian people. But that's just the normal, of course, behaviour of capitalism, private capital. The boardroom and the CEOs, their job is to maximise the dividend to their shareholders. That's normal behaviour. That's the problem with the system. A classic case is the car manufacturing industry. Successive Australian governments have allowed and even encouraged foreign investment and hence ownership until the control of the entire car industry was 100% owned by foreign companies, right? 100% the Australian car industry. The government lost any control over it, and the entire industry was taken out of Australia by its foreign owners who decided they could make higher profits elsewhere. We not only lost a major engineering industry, but the jobs and skills that went with it. We also lose out because of tax manipulation and so-called creative accounting.
That's 7 minutes. We have 3 to go.
Oh, God. Recent work by the investigative journalist Michael West and the Tax Justice Network have exposed the myriads of ways in which certain corporations get around the tax laws. ExxonMobil, for example, paid zero tax on more than $18 billion in income in 2014-15, although the price of domestic gas went through the roof. Figures analysed and released in December 2017 showed Glencore, which operates in commodity industries such as coal, copper, oil and zinc, managed to get rid of all its profit and tax on $22 billion in income. Shell Australia paid zero tax on $4.2 billion in revenue. Chevron, nothing on $2.1 billion. Viva Energy, which bought the petrol stations from Shell, zero tax on $16.8 billion. And ExxonMobil, not a cent on $6.7 billion. In short, one Australian worker, a cleaner, a nurse, a teacher, a waterside worker, one Australian worker paid more tax in that year than 5 giant US corporations whose combined income in that year was $51.8 billion. Clinton points out that Norway's experience in handling energy. Norway harnessed its earnings from oil and gas in its continental shelf. The Norwegian government is the largest shareholder in State Oil, its state oil company. The Norwegian government created Oil Fonda, or the Oil Fund, in 1990 to invest Norway's oil revenue. The fund had more than 11 billion kroner. Now, in Australian terms, That's 1.7 trillion Australian dollars to invest. This was a handsome investment for a country with only 5.5 million people. Norway has one of the highest living standards in the world. A different way of handling the situation. Successive Australian governments have lost sovereign control of the economy and the ability to set national priorities. The defence against foreign ownership in US corporations is publicly owned, governmentally owned enterprises, the reversal of privatisation. That ownership can be regained using the compulsory acquisition powers under the Constitution, using the existing power of the legislator, S 5131, to acquire property on just terms. So Parliament does have the powers to nationalise in whole or in part critical national industries and provide compensation over a long period of time. It's simply a question of whose interests are to be served and having vision, intent and some Australian backbone to do what's needed. Yes, okay, I will sum up. In summing up, we are being ripped off. We are not getting a fair return of the immense wealth of this country, which could otherwise provide us with world-class infrastructure, including affordable housing and transportation, free health, free education and childcare, and help us address the climate crisis. In its absence, we have economic oppression every day, with people having to work 2 or more jobs to keep their heads above financial water and suffering emotional pressure, leading in some cases to family breakups, mental illness, and 1 in 6 Australian children living in poverty. When is the revolt coming? I'm reminded of the words of a great independence revolutionary, Ho Chi Minh, who said, "A man or woman joins the revolution when they recognise the source of their oppression." And it's the mission of IPAN and all progressive people to help awaken the Australian people to the source of their economic oppression so that we can implement the title of this conference and break free from the US and rebuild Australia as an independent, peaceful, sustainable country free from economic oppression.